Welcome to Beyond the Notes. In this video, I'm going to give a digestible walkthrough of all the changes, then, using what we learned, we'll build an AC that best uses the new buffs. This patch is going to be a massive rebalance of everything, and each change builds upon the other. I'll be covering the notes in categories in order to contain my train of thought, because holy hell, this is basically an entirely different game. But here is the TLDR for those with ADHD. The lightweight part stability buffs combined with some meta weapon nerfs and assault boost nerfs means a better time for lightweight players. No more getting staggered instantaneously by 2 Zimmermen and killed. It'll take at least 4 shots now. Generally speaking, bazookas are actually viable, and range kinetics such as machine guns and linear rifles are much more usable. Build variety has skyrocketed, and heavies no longer dominate with no counter. It is a fantastic patch, and you should definitely be trying it out if the previous patch turned you away from PvP. If you already read all the patch notes, you can sort of skip to the end of the video for the analysis and build. Check out the Reddit user Umbra Bliss for creating a statistical visualization for a lot of this stuff. I'll be using the work to help explain the stats. This is going to be a long video, so I thank you for your patience. Let's get into it. The biggest change around are the broad spectrum movement speed rework, the weapon changes, and the general body part buffs. The old speed graph is out the window, as the lightest ACs now can achieve about 400 regular boost speed, and the heaviest ACs can barely move past 246 assault boost. Let's do an example side by side. As you can see, the tank is far slower than ever before, with its assault boost speed barely 3 speed over the regular boost speed. These changes are combined with assault kick changes. Every assault boost crash now have been gutted to do 110 damage and only 35 cumulative impact. Kicks across the board, except for reverse joint kicks, have been nerfed impact wise. You're still getting damage based on your weight, but the impact will be down quite a bit. The biggest nerf came to Tetra legs. Tetra legs now have their impact nerfed by 50%. They also had their kick angle reduced from 90 degrees to 55 degrees. So it means that the Tetra kick spam isn't quite as powerful as before. The reverse joint kicks are basically the only one that still has their impact and damage. They should still be very relevant. The speed adjustment means that you're actually losing a lot of damage off of the tank assault boost kicks if you're running a super heavy build. And even for the Tetras, you're going to lose a lot of damage unless you're running the Blizzo booster. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that we're finally probably where we should have been. A balance between speed and firepower has been achieved. The reverse joints have the best kicks, but the worst of the stability. The tanks have probably the okayest kicks with the worst speed. And we are finally getting to a point where speed is a better trade-off than pure firepower and tankiness. With that in mind, I'm going to introduce the overall theme of the patch, build diversity. Just keep that in mind for the rest of the video. On to weapon buffs. Bazookas in general have had their reload times decreased and slightly reworked. They now explode at max effective distance. Most bazookas always had a proximity detonation function anyways, so I'm not exactly sure if these new changes come into effect very much, since the range for bazookas are very often around 700 meters. There is one exception to the rules, and that is the Dizzy. With the Dizzy's only 285 effective range, you can actually try to airburst targets now. So I guess if you're good with a Dizzy, this could be a skill expressive way to extend the grenade. Now, the biggest boost to bazooka so far in general that I've playtested is actually the velocity increase. Bazooka projectile velocity is overall buffed by 12 to 70%. The biggest winner from these buffs are the Majestic with its 145 points of velocity increase, the Dizzy with the airburst function, and the Yuangjin with now the 3.4 seconds of reload time. The Earshot and the Songbirds also benefited from the slight rework. With these buffs though, I'm thinking a lot more bazooka integration into builds, and personally I'm loving it. And I think people are going to be using these three big bazookas: the Earshot, the Majestic, and the Dizzy. But I also want you guys to know that the Javelin Alpha is really good. I'm going to be using, spoiler, I'm going to be using the Javelin Alpha in my build at the end of the video. While we're on the topic of explosives, let's talk about the explosive thrower. It's now overall more worth the slot because of the overall range increase. 80 range went to 125 range. 80 was just too short, and now my new Gundam with the Harris and explosive shield works better than ever before. The ammo buff for the explosive shield also makes PvE a lot better. So this is overall a really good change, and I'm using the thrower a lot more on range builds to keep away melee combatants. The missile changes are, well, they're pretty mixed. The 45-degree shooting missiles are buffed around 20% stat-wise. They're now faster and stronger in every way compared to the straight horizontal missiles, except the problem never was their stats. The problem was always that they would not hit very much. The tracking remains very bad against people who are boosting towards you and people who are moving vertically up and down. At least it feels that way to me. But hey, at least the stats are getting better. The P08 has actually become quite decent because of their overall stat increase, but the other two remain, in my opinion, the D or F tier. The guiding missiles also got a really good buff, more tracking and more speed. The speed is really important here. In the past, the missiles would be slow enough to be, well, outran by a lot of mobile suits. Wait, did I just call them mobile suits? Anyways, now they can track your IP address. This is going to be a much needed buff to apply pressure on unassuming enemies because these missiles can often come from behind and sort of need unique input to dodge. They're kind of like siege missiles in a way where you can't dodge them just by quick boosting once. An excellent change, and I expect more people to be using the double guiding missiles in order to pressure the enemy. In fact, I would actually suggest you use these missiles over the Soups missiles that have like the big racks. They're much cheaper and do about the same thing. Other miscellaneous weapon buffs include a wide array of ammunition increases for handguns. Aurora also got energy weapon specialization, the laser orbit, and drones, or I guess their turrets, are generally buffed. And these are not super groundbreaking buffs, but they're really, really nice to have to increase that build variety that I talked about before. And there are other buffs. I'll be talking about the linear rifles after I talk about the arm parts. So let's go on to the weapon nerfs. These are targeted nerfs against the most meta-defining weapons of last patch. However, I think because of the part changes and speed rebalancing, some of these weapons will fall even lower on the tier list than expected. Let's talk about the hand weapons first. The Haldeman got a slight direct nerf from 105 direct damage to 90, but the Zimmy sort of got gutted. This gun has been meta-defining for a month, so of course it's going to get taken down the peg. The Zimmerman has received a 12% nerf in damage, but a major 37% nerf to initial impact down to 630. What this means is you'll no longer be able to instantly stagger lightweight frames with 2 Zimmerman shots. While it's no longer instantly deadly to lightweights, it still retains a fair portion of its cumulative impact, which means, hey, the Zimmerman is still a good weapon, and it still does a ton of damage. I got my ass kicked by dual Zimmermans here. However, I believe that it's not overwhelmingly the best pick for every situation. Now, I think this opens up a lot more space for the other shotguns to be effective in their own way, and also other CQC weapons as well. With a Zimmerman time to kill decreased dramatically, I also think that melee builds that rely on Zimmerman for stagger will suffer dramatically in power. So let me know in the comments how you feel about the Zimmerman nerfs. Are they useless now, or are you still ruining lobbies with 2 of them? The next weapon nerf was the Nebula Charge Attack. Only the Charge Attack was nerfed because the gun was pretty dominant, I think. And it completely overshadowed the other plasma rifle. With all the changes, the Charge Attack of the Nebula is around 25% less effective than before. Although after testing, the biggest change seems to be the charge time increase. This means you can still spam the nebula at around the same damage potential, but it will have bigger gaps in between charge shots for enemies to punish. Next target of nerf that is missile launchers. Yep, the Apartive missile launcher is no more. It is really bad. I'm running a medium biped with a new Gundam, and I'm still dodging most of the missiles at around 327 boost speed with relative ease. With bigger reload times and worse tracking, a pure siege missile build is going to suffer pain, which is probably a good thing because no one liked playing against siege missile builds in the first place. Expect Apartes to be traded out with the 4-cell handheld missile launcher in your near future. Those 4-cell handheld are really good, and I think they're going to be played on missile lightweights, definitely. We call those missile rats, and they're already here. It's been like a day, man. People just can't, they can't contain themselves to put missiles on everything. But you know what though? The Coral missiles also suffered as their charge attack power went down significantly. With all the changes, it's likely to stagger much less and do about 20% less damage overall. It's still likely to deal more damage to heavyweights, but now the speed buffs make the lightweights quite capable of dodging the slow core missile projectiles. I think though, with the assault boost changes added in with some missile changes, these changes dramatically decrease the heavy missile boost power. Expect not a lot of people to be running the heavy hover tank treads anymore and running the missile builds. So, okay, then you got the Trunos, which technically aren't really missiles, but they're categorized as a missile in the game, but whatever. They're now less likely to hit strafing enemies since they have applied a stable trajectory. I think that means they will no longer curve in mid-air, and a qualitative 10 guidance decrease. This will cause double Truno builds to be much harder to run against speedy ACs. Although Trunos are still good stagger punish, I think you're probably better running something else on that back slot. Now, other back weapons got their fair share of nerfs. Specifically, the Stun Needle and Songbirds are being nerfed. The Stun Needle definitely needs some tuning down, and damn, they hit it hard, with 30% impact nerf and 25% direct hit modifier nerf. It seems like they tried to kill the power of the double Stun Needles, but it still feels really powerful. The damage from the electric explosion remains untouched, so it's a bit of a tone down. However, I think it still remains a really good punished weapon after people get staggered, although from what we talked about before, it's a lot harder to get people to that stagger state. I expect people to replace the Stun Needle with the Earshot now, since the Earshot still does massive damage, just got a reload buff, and also hits more reliably because of the massive AoE. I'm a little bit sad though about the Songbirds being nerfed because we don't really see the Songbirds that much in PvP already. The Earshot was a decidedly better alternative due its due to its massive AoE. Nevertheless, the Songbird suffered an overall 15% nerf, but benefited from the bazooka rework as the projectile now explodes at max distance. Again, not sure how relevant that change really is, but the reload is nice. Oh, we should have gone for the head. The head parts buff focused on stability and system recovery. The stats are on the screen now, but what this all means is that head variety will increase overall. Most heads receive 20 to 50 more stability, with the biggest buff for the Tianquan at a 110 stability increase. It's still a really bad head though. One thing to note is that despite the nerf, the VP44D remains on the top of its class in terms of stability. ARM recoil buffs are generally focused on buffing the bazooka and kinetic control. The laser weapons have almost no recoil, so these are really much needed buffs to make sustained fire kinetics worth using. Across the board, we're seeing a 10 to 40 point raise. The Alba, the HAL, the Nactier, and the VP46 went up the most in regarding control. This also means that grenade launchers plus kinetics is possible to control now. And speaking of controlling recoil, let's talk about the linear rifles. The Curtis had its slight buffs before in terms of damage, but now it's got a recoil buff, and both linear rifles got a charge buff. So that means the Curtis now charged in half a second and only has 24 recoil, and the Harris have a slight damage buff to its charge shot to 977, and the charge time is only 0.8 seconds. These are not insignificant buffs, because now the Curtis can be used by lighter arms in close and mid-range situations. Previously, you would need pretty big arms to retain accuracy. Now the Harris still has one of the most impactful charge shots in the game, and it's even better now. I think the linear rifles will be a force to be reckoned with after people start to understand the value of versatile mid-range weapons. However, I still think linear rifles need about 100 to 200 more range. It just needs a little bit more. Maybe I just want the idea of a sniper rifle in the game. I heard the word sniper rifles in previous games. I'm not exactly sure why the linear rifles have such short range. Even the lasers generally have more range than the linear rifles, which is really weird. So there are also leg buffs that combo really well with the overall head buffs. These buffs mostly focus around stability and quick boost velocity. FromSoftware is making sure that your little lightweight boosts are as impactful as possible. There are a lot of also armor buffs and jump distance buffs littered around the list. We're seeing about 50 to 100 more stability for basically every biped and reverse joint leg, with the biggest winners being the desert leg buffs. It went up in AP, it went up in stability, and it went up in jump distance. The other legs are not far behind in terms of buffs, and overall, it's a fantastic time to be a biped player. Now, it's time to rapid fire some misc changes. Boosters overall got a 300 to 500 more upward thrust speed. This is a huge amount for those that can benefit from being above an enemy, and cuts down on the energy drain for those lighter ACs. It also indirectly nerfs tank treads even more, because now the tanks won't have the verticality to really chase lightweights. The AG generator series were also buffed by about 100 to 400 more energy, more recovery, and energy weapon specialization. While not practical to have energy specialization below 100, it's a welcome change from before, and you can realistically maybe slap on one energy weapon here and it wouldn't matter too much. More build diversity buffs, which is great. The NAC core got a stability buff and a generator output buff, definitely giving it some more room to breathe and more room to fit in weapons. The pulse protection and the terminal armor got buffs too, and the protection now might have some uses in team games because it's got 700. The pulse protection and terminal armor got buffs too, and now the protection might have some uses in team game now that it has 7,000 health. The biggest takeaway from all of this is that the part adjustments will increase build variety, and Fashion Core is more playable now that there's not just 3 heads that provide stability, which is fantastic. The core of Armored Core is personalization and wide arrays of playstyles. And, you know, having these stat changes are really needed for a game that thrives on customization. There are some nerfs to parts though, and I'm not exactly sure I'm agreeing with all of them. Quad legs got a 26% health nerf. They also had that assault kick change that majorly affected their balance, so we'll have to keep an eye on quads because they still have a lot of advantages over the bipeds, but the stats are a bit closer now. The wheelchairs also got nerfed, as the overall stability of the wheelchair is below the basal legs. Not to mention decreased defenses versus every type of damage. These changes will make it so that the wheelchair is easier to catch and easier to kill overall. The basal arms and the jailbreak arms didn't get a recoil buff, so I guess that's kind of a nerf in itself, and their defenses were cut down. In addition, with the shotgun nerfs, This will be very detrimental for pure melee enthusiasts who are trying to use the Bastro's high melee specialization. I honestly recommend moving to the Firmiza or VP44D for melee builds now. The Ephemera core is going to have its decreases in defenses by around 30%. However, that's 30% for each defensive stat, so the effective defense nerf is probably much higher. I'm not exactly sure why they're nerfing the Ephemera core, but oh well. The PO5, Abbott, and Talbot are going to have their close range effectiveness decrease, and I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's just because they were some of the most used FCS in the game, and FromSoft really wanted us to move away from super close range combat. I congrat the Zoomers who made it this far in the video. Here is an anime picture to get your neurons activating again before the analysis. Okay, so I think what's gonna happen here, alright, bear with me here. Traditional biped ACs will become very dominant across the board. The speed buff is super essential here. Now you can dodge most missiles and really get into the pace that you want to lead with, especially because the speed for heavier ACs are nerfed now. Staple stuff like rifles, missiles, and shields are going to be back on the menu, but probably won't be overwhelmingly powerful. I think we're going to see a lot more close games rather than stat check stomps. Speed adjustments mean that, hey, we actually have a mid-range now, and that honestly opens up so much more build variety in the game. And stability increases means that we're going to see burst weapons such as the Zimmerman decrease in value, and sustained damage weapons increase in value. Pistols, rifles, bazookas are all going to be used around, but in my mind, I'm going to be using the Javelin Alpha in this build as a Punisher. Javelin Alpha already has the best velocity in the bazooka class, and it also has a huge stagger punishing potential. Lasers also remain very good, probably the best mid-range option, but they lack the stagger I want for the playstyle. Linear rifles are also really good, but I already made a build for that took advantage of the linear rifle plus explosive throw combo. So honestly, check out the new Gundam build video if you really want to see that. So after much deliberation, I present to the Council of Internet Opinions the AX Striker. I took into account the ARM recoil control buffs, the speed rework, and the biped leg changes. This has led me to a medium weight dual pistol build. The Vientos were already some of the fastest staggering weapons in the game, but with the Zimmerman out of the picture, they'll be performing even better. This build will rely on the pistols to bring in good sustained damage and sustained stagger. I considered using the Cocolettes and the Dukids, but the recoil were double of that of the Vientos. And plus, the Vientos had more range, up to 201 meter, I think. Most weapons can't hit or will ricochet around 300 meters anyways, so a lot of fights are going to be around that 100 to 250 meter range generally. Vientos are perfect for that. While burst weapons now struggle to get over the impact threshold, now this is where cumulative stagger weapons will shine. The Vientos never really staggered in one magazine anyways, so that 100 to 200 extra stability from the head and leg buffs doesn't really mean too much for the pistols. I did consider using auto weapons such as the Ludlaus for the sample, or laser weapons such as the laser pistols and the rifles, but those suffer from, well, the auto weapons suffer from low damage and low accuracy, and the laser weapons suffer from low stagger. In addition to the Vientos, we'll also be running the Javelin Alpha as a stagger punish, and the plasma vertical missiles for sustained long range and utility. Why carry a heavy ass bazooka on the back where you can't even use it as a shoulder weapon? Well, it's really good. It's my choice in a stagger punishing weapon over a melee weapon because it comes out pretty fast, its range is 220 direct impact damage, it has a secondary explosion that does more damage, and you can actually sort of use it in neutral. It's a little bit hard to use it in neutral, but you can kick into Javelin Alpha for a lot of damage. And during the testing, I found that the Javelin Alpha does about as much damage as a charged dagger strike anyways, and it's also safer against stuff like assault armor. So that's why I'm going to use the Javelin Alpha overall rather than a melee weapon for the finish. The plasma verticals are, well, I'm using the plasma verticals. They're reliable, they deal damage around cover, and when I can time them to hit when the stagger hits, that's just perfection. The body parts are as follows: the VP-44D head, the Fromeza body, the Melander arms, and the desert, almost said desert, legs. The desert legs are really important because they provide a ton of stability and armor points, while the Fromeza core makes it so that the booster still has good output despite this build being relatively heavy. You see, the desert legs are really heavy, but they also have 977 stability. So yeah, I'm gonna run that. I'm also running the Maintain generator for good recharge and the Talbot FCS for good close and mid-range tracking. The booster has to be the BST-02 because we're actually barely hitting the speed curb weight of 75,000, where our speed will start to dip below 300. I recommend running Pulse Shield or Terminal Armor because Assault Armor doesn't really combo well with the Javelin Alpha too well. I would consider this build a excellent all-rounder build. It's a little bit short-ranged, but the plasma verticals do help. It's very good gameplay loop and pretty good defensive stats for his speed. We'll go Missile, Vientals, Javelin Alpha, Missile again. While this build could have existed last patch, it wasn't very well optimized and would have suffered from a lot of recoil, speed, and burst issues. We'll take advantage of the changes where we can and gear it towards the gameplay loop of AC6 it was designed for. I did consider building another sort of like explosive shield with a stagger weapon, maybe like a bazooka kind of build, but again, I did that already with a new Gundam, so I find that this build can stand up to melee punishers, kiters, and even catch some of the mid-range kite builds, which is, well, pretty good. However, I do know that it's going to lack a bit of range against those really pesky missile rats that are super lightweight and fire missiles at you from a billion miles away. But those builds need unique counters anyways that aren't very relevant to how most people play. So if you see those kind of builds, you can always switch off the AX Striker. Overall, I think you should give this patch a try and also give the Vientals and the Javelin Alpha a try. I'm very happy with the results so far, and the dual Vientals have definitely gained a lot of ground in my mind in this patch. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please get some water. I'm going to get some water. It's been 30 minutes. Touch some grass, and I'll see you next time.